is there an underlying conflict? Is it really just this thing, or is it always going to be something? If we solve that, go come back next year with something else. So, sometimes if we can, it's great if we can get to the underlying source of the conflict. That's when cases sort of magically work out.
Hi, I'm Rachel Green, Brooklyn-based divorce mediator and collaborative attorney, and this is my podcast, Keep the Kids in Mind. Join me as I chat with other industry professionals about everything from smoothly navigating your way through divorce to prenups, all the while keeping the kids in mind. Hi, I'm Rachel Green, and welcome to Keep the Kids in Mind. I am very pleased today to have a chance to talk with Teresa Ombres, who I have known for a long time because we both started mediating around the same time, 20 plus years ago. Teresa was one of my first mediation friends, and I always enjoy talking to her about our work that we're both so passionately committed to. She is a divorce mediator, attorney, and collaborative attorney with a private practice in Great Neck, New York. She grew disillusioned with matrimonial practice early in her career and found the alternative out-of-court settlement dispute resolution world. She spent many years on the board of the Family and Divorce Mediation Council of Greater New York, and she is also on the board of the New York Association of Collaborative Professionals. And she's just has a lot of wisdom and compassion to share with us today. So, Teresa, welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that we've been friends for so long.
I always enjoy talking to you about this work that we both love so much. So you were just telling me about a new case that you have where the couple has decided to do collaborative divorce and we're not interested in doing mediation. And I'm so interested to hear what were their reasons for preferring collaborative practice to mediation, because that is a choice that many of our listeners are faced with as they enter this world of trying to figure out what process they want to use to restructure their family.
So you and I are mediators. Some people become mediators because they want one more tool in their toolbox. But we're mediators. That's my personality. It's your personality. It's who we are. And so we were mediating before collaborative existed. And when collaborative for the longest time, and I would say probably still for the most part, I think of it as the next best thing to mediation. Because mediation has always had my heart. However, or at the same time, I'm beginning to understand more and more the nuances and intricacies about why they may be better off in a collaborative situation than mediation. We can't tell when we first meet clients because they come in and they're, I think, trying to show us their best selves. And when people come in to consult with us for mediation and seem perfectly reasonable and bright and able to advocate for themselves in the mediation, because even though we are there to guide them and help them and give them legal information, we can't advocate for them.
Right. We can't speak for them. I mean, I always think of the two cornerstones of mediation are that they have to be able to express their own thoughts and feelings and what they need and want, and also listen to what the other person needs and wants.
And be able to make decisions.
Yes, that's true. Right.
And sometimes the dynamic has been where one of them takes most of the decisions. And when the other is asked to make a decision, you kind of get like a humana moment. And it's like, oh, wow, we did all this work. So in this recent case, the husband was referred to me by a close friend, and he is a very close friend of her son's. And he reached out to me before the end of last year. His wife was going through some transition at work, so he didn't want to really bother her about it yet, but he wanted to learn more about mediation, and he was very interested. And then right after the beginning of the year, she contacted me. And after speaking with her for a little while, she said that she would feel more comfortable in the room if she had her own person to guide her. But she was definitely not interested in litigating. They definitely wanted to do the right thing by their child, and wanted to be amicable and wanted to be able to co-parent. But she just felt a little less able to advocate for herself.
Just less confident about like
I think so. Yeah.
understanding and the emotions, people's brains too. And so she felt that she would just do better if she had somebody who's kind of not as passionate, more dispassionate, sitting next to her and
Right.
helping her to make decisions.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting.
Right. And so because I had spoken to her and spoken to him, I wanted to make sure if we were going to proceed collaboratively, if it would be okay with her if I was his collaborative lawyer.
Right. Because you spoke to
And
both of them and you wouldn't want her to feel like you were changing sides
right,
in the middle.
right. And she said she welcomed it. So that was nice. I felt like they both trusted me. And that I would help get them through this process where they don't have to be enemies.
Right, right. And that's a good foundation for a collaborative process too, because in the collaborative process, ideally, the whole team is working on helping them to resolve their differences, even, and you're working on behalf of your client, but you also want to understand what the other client needs and wants so that you can, reach across the table and offer them something that they want in exchange for something that you want. I think
Mhm.
that's how it's supposed to work in theory anyway.
Mhm. And I think helping them understand each other is really the key. I've been saying this for a long time and understood this one of those things that I actually learned from my own marriage. And this goes back many years. My husband called me a liar, and I said, "What do you mean? Like, I'm not a liar." And he said, "Well, you said you were going to the store." I go, and it was like this light bulb when I realized, oh, so he's very black and white, and I'm very like, maybe I'm going to do this, maybe I'm not going to do it. So it wasn't definite in my mind, but he translated it as definite. And so here we were having this conflict over really just a misunderstanding. And once I understood what he was thinking, he understood what I was thinking, it was okay. Like, you still may disagree with each other, like you should have gone to the store or whatever, but you're not going to be angry because you realize why it happened or where it was coming from.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key to what we try to do. I'm actually listening to a book called The Righteous Mind, and the author is, gosh, his last name is Zach. I'll tell you in a minute. But what he's trying to do is help people who have differences over religion or differences over politics, which we have a lot of these days. You still don't have to dislike each other. If you can really understand each other, there doesn't have to be this animosity.
So is the righteous mind the person who feels like I'm right and I believe this and that's the right thing and I can
Yeah,
reject other people because I'm so right? Is that
yeah,
kind of the stance of the righteous mind?
yeah. But it just reinforces that what we try to do in mediation and collaborative practice is help people understand each other.
Yeah.
And when you try that in a litigated case with an adversary who is just completely unenlightened, they will look at you and say, "This isn't therapy." Someone did this to me last week in a four-way. It wasn't a collaborative case. "This isn't therapy." And I was like, oh my goodness, like doing this work for 40 years and not doing it in a way that will actually be helpful to people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of amazing to me. I've had some recent negative experiences with litigation attorneys who, I'm brought in because they mediated with someone else and I'm coming in as a reviewing attorney, consulting attorney. At the end of the process, we have a draft agreement and then the other spouse hires a litigator. And
So,
I've had like 2 or 3 experiences where the attorney is so nasty to me,
yeah.
just saying like every email I get from this one guy, it makes my blood boil.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
is he forking attacking me? I'm not I'm not his adversary. He's not, I mean, neither of us are the spouses. Why do we
Right.
have to?
It's not about you, right?
It's not about us. But he just says, I'm going to do the changes to this agreement. And if you and your client make any other changes, I'm not going to read them. And then he goes, I said, I'd be happy to, I mean, we have reached agreement on these last couple of issues, at least in theory. And he says, well, I have a lot of work. He says, my client and I both have a lot of work to do, unlike you and your client, and we won't be able to get this done until Friday. I'm like, what the fork? How do you know what my workload is?
No, about your
What are
life,
you
right?
talking about? Like, why does you just have to be so, put me on the defensive like every conversation I have? It's
Right.
just mind-boggling to me.
Well, I think what's happened is people practice like that, and that's just the way they do it. And it's, I guess, in their minds, worked for them, but it doesn't work for the clients. It's not helpful to the clients.
It's not helpful to the clients, and especially if they have kids.
Right.
Framing each other as the enemy when they're gonna have, an innocent young person is in the middle of them and really wants to be given permission to love both of them, and is not going to thank you for destroying their other parent.
Correct. Right.
And why put further obstacles? They're already struggling with the conflicts between them and trying to find their way to a new restructured family where they can hopefully co-parent, reasonably and amicably. Yeah.
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here. But I really don't understand people who have made different choices. I mean, it's my blind spot, who are framing the whole thing as a war.
I think they just don't know better. And it can be based on so many things. Growing up, it could be that they want to win. That's one of the things that I've heard. People don't do this work because they want to win. And they don't know if they define what winning means when they say that.
Right.
And sadly, they hire lawyers who play right into that and don't disabuse them of the notion. Don't ask them questions like, well, what do you want the future to look like in this differently structured family? How do you want to remember this time in your life? How do you want your kids to remember this time in their lives? They're just not thinking about that. I think we're all born to be good. I think we're led astray. It's easy. There are a lot of influences that can sort of derail that. But this is such an emotionally difficult time for people.
Yeah.
And if we can help them be clear about what they want this to look like, because they're not thinking about that. And when you say you want to win, what does that mean? What is it that you want to win?
Right.
A bigger piece of the pie?
Yeah.
I mean, what is it that you want to win?
Yeah, I guess that's probably deeply from their childhoods, this feeling of winning and losing.
Yeah.
I mean, I was contacted a few months ago by somebody who's working, I don't know whether it'll ever come to fruition, but they're working on a new HBO program where they're going to deal with intractable neighbor disputes. And they were talking to me about possibly being the mediator. I have not heard from them again, so I figured they've chosen someone else if it's going to even come to fruition. But they found these two women who live next door to each other and are just having an all-out battle. And one of the women is from a military family, and she was talking about how when she was a kid, her father said, "Never give up the fight, and you have to win."
Wow.
When you're in a dispute, never give up the fight. So her father has passed on, but she just feels like she's carrying on her family legacy by being in battle with this neighbor. So that helped me have a better understanding of where she was coming from.
Right.
I did not have a chance to interview the parties, so I didn't get what's driving the other one. But, that was so fascinating to me to hear that, like, from an early age, she was told to frame things as win and lose and battle, and then to be the best fighter. And it was fascinating.
So there you go. So this is how people get there, right?
Right, that's how people get there. But
Do you know what they were fighting about? I'm sorry.
oh, what they're fighting about? Well, they share a driveway.
Okay. Figured
And
that.
it's just escalated. I mean, they had a conflict over, like, a new heating system was put in the house of one of them, and there was a pipe that was extended out so the other one couldn't get her car through.
Oh.
And so, it seems to me that it was the HVAC person who made the mistake and who
Right.
just should have been called to say, move that pipe. It's blocking
Right.
the driveway. I mean, it doesn't seem like rocket science that it could have been all avoided.
Right.
But instead, she got a saw and sawed off the
Oh,
pipe.
please.
And then there was a carbon monoxide buildup in the other person. I mean,
Oh,
it just started and then it just built and built.
no. Did they get along before that?
I think they didn't have much of a relationship. Like, what they hadn't been neighbors for 20 years and then this erupted. I think I get the feeling that they were neighbors for a yearish.
Oh, wow. Wow. So when I worked for community mediation services early in my mediation career, these are exactly the kinds of disputes that we had. Shared driveways. I remember there was one where one of the families was constantly washing cars in the shared driveway.
Oh,
It drove the other people crazy. But I think they wanted to get along, and we found, we came up with like different times that they would do it or something like that.
right. I mean, these things can be resolved if you just sit down and talk to each other.
Yeah. But you also wonder, the reason I was asking, like, how long they had known each other, is there an underlying conflict? Is it really just this thing, or is it always going to be something? If we solve that, go come back next year with something else. So
Right.
sometimes if we can, it's great if we can get to the underlying source of the conflict.
Yeah.
And that's when cases sort of magically work out.
Right.
I'm reminded of a case that we had in community mediation services mediation services in the state of New York, every county has some agency that works on dispute resolution. There are community dispute resolution centers in every county, and it's generally neighbor complaints. You see a lot of that. Because there are disputes that don't involve like a crime, so you can't get into court with it, but there's this dispute going on. So I think it's kind of
I was told that it was disputes where the police were called and then the
often,
DA
yes.
declined to prosecute, because
Right.
it is just a neighbor dispute, or, it wasn't a crime, right?
Right. So we had this one case one time where there were upstairs neighbors who lived, one on the second floor, one on the first floor. And the neighbor on the first floor was complaining of these terrible noises that had happened mostly like after 11 o'clock at night. And she felt very disrespected by it. I think she thought that the people upstairs thought that they were better than her or more educated than her or something. And she felt like they weren't being respectful to her. Anytime she complained about this, they just were dismissive about it. And as we got her to speak more about the specifics of it, I just mentioned the one that sort of cracked the case. She said it would happen like after 11 o'clock at night. And then the upstairs neighbor said, "Oh, that's when we play with our 25-pound cat."
Oh, how funny.
And the woman on the first floor said, "Oh, never mind."
Really?
Once she knew it
Yeah,
wasn't them being disrespectful to her, she didn't care about the noise. It was the
so
feeling.
funny.
It was
It was the
fabulous.
feeling that, like, as if they were saying, "Oh, it's your bedtime. We're gonna
Yeah,
irritate."
we're going to disturb you now. Yeah. Because we don't like you.
I'm gonna practice my tap dancing.
So once she knew it wasn't about her, it was fascinating. It was
That is
fascinating.
fascinating.
Yeah.
That is fascinating.
Right. So
You
if
know,
we
it's
can
also sorry.
I was going to say, if we can do that in all of our cases, like,
Yeah.
it's
Get
not-
to the core.
maybe
Right.
it's not about you.
Right. I have another review case where my client forwarded me a whole series of text messages that have gone between the couple, in the last week. And, I don't usually see that kind of communication because it's not really directly relevant to what I'm doing with them. And I do try to be efficient. I'm using my time as their money, and I don't want to, spend time. But this collection of messages was just heartbreaking for me to read because
Mm,
both of them are in so much pain and they
mhm.
both feel completely unheard and unacknowledged by each other. And I just felt like the mediator in me wanted to get them in a room together to talk about the pain, and he was trying to say, I treasure our years together and my hope is that we can become friends. And she couldn't hear any of
Wow.
that because she's broken, torn up about that,
Right.
and he doesn't know how to respond to her when she's talking about that pain. He's very defensive. The whole
Right.
thing was just heartbreaking to read.
What he needs to acknowledge is that that pain is real for her,
Right.
even
Right.
though.
Right. And and pain is not a rational thing. We feel what we feel.
Right. So reasoning isn't gonna
No,
change.
it's not gonna help. What you said before about when we were talking about the couple that are electing the collaborative process over mediation. And I know that that I lost both my parents in the past year and a half. And every time I'm dealing with something about their estate,
Mm,
it's like this fog like descends on me, and I just can't like hold the thoughts in my head, and I
mm,
can't like I'm the executor of the estate, so I'm trying very hard to be responsible and keep good records and and be rational, but it's amazing how emotional it is for me.
wow.
And it just occurred to me as we were talking that that must be how many of our clients feel too, because divorce, it is like a death. It's the death of the marriage. It's the death of the future that you thought you were going to have. Your life has now taken a sharp turn. And, people don't get married to get divorced. They
Right.
didn't think this was going to happen.
Right. Generally.
Generally. And they didn't think this was going to happen. And they're in different stages of grief. And I can absolutely understand that idea that, in this
That's
transition,
great.
so many things to think about, and they're in like the fog of divorce.
That's really helpful, Rachel. That really is. Like, right, they don't want to deal with it. They don't want to deal with it. It's too
Yeah.
painful.
Right.
Right. Which it's amazing that people call us up and do want to deal with it.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the first things I usually ask people when they call, and I'm sure you do that as well, is how long have you been separated? And,
Right.
I had a call once on a Monday and they said, oh, Saturday night we decided we're going to separate. And I said, uh,
Wait, I have one that's 30 years.
right, right. You sure you want, maybe we should talk in a few weeks? Like, you know, Um, but most, sometimes they're the ones that have been separated for 1 to 2 years. And I always feel like, oh, great, they're ready now.
Mhm.
They've lived it. They've figured out the bare minimum and
Mhm.
what schedule their kids are going to have. What are they doing about finances? And then they just separated and are living
Mhm.
they're walking the walk. Now they're ready to talk the talk.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
because things have settled down and
Yeah.
hopefully the worst parts of the suffering and pain have passed.
Right. No, they're more emotionally distant, I think, from the pain, and so they can do it. Or yeah,
Right. And they also have experience with the logistics. Like, this did not work well for Christmas. This,
yeah,
so I want to do better for spring break, or
yeah,
they have they're bringing that experience to the table.
yeah.
And that's such great information. I mean, sometimes it happens that they come in and we put together those preliminary things, and then a year and a half passes, and then they come back. I mean, people do it all different time frames, and I always say to them, that's one of the things you control, and it's
Right.
probably the issue about which is there's the most variation, I find. I've had
Mhm.
people do their whole divorce mediation in 3 weeks, and I've had people do it in 9 years, and that's the range.
Right. Well, so in the old days, when you had to prove fault to get divorced, when we first started mediating, I had a drawer full of separation agreements that they would come back later. So, and sometimes they would forget, I think. So I had one couple come back 9 years later and, oh yeah, we did a lot of things different. So we had some amendments to their agreement and then we got divorced. But
Yeah. Yeah, my 9-year case, they were waiting for her father to die because she was going
oh
to get
my
a big
God.
inheritance.
Oh,
And so during those 9 years, their kid grew up, graduated college, they sold their
wow.
house. So many things got resolved during the 9 years.
Right, right, right.
And he was paying her spousal support. And then her father passed away, and they were ready to sign their final agreement. And he got a big chunk of the father's estate because they discussed that in the mediation, and they said they had always, they like hadn't saved anything for retirement because they
Right.
were expecting this inheritance at some point, and they signed their agreement, and they both cried when they
Wow.
signed, even though they had been separated for 9 years.
How amazing. But
Yeah.
how interesting that they were able to just speak about that money that we know is considered separate property in the state of New York and say, no, we're sharing it. We always said we would, and we're going to share it, and we're going to share it because to them, I guess it seems like the right thing to do.
Right.
And that's just, I had friends who litigated over that issue. And when they came to me, when they told me they were getting divorced, I said, okay, come in. And I tried to lecture them, I guess, about how to do this the right way. And no, they litigated for years because during the marriage, the parents of one of them had passed away and there was inheritance and it was spent. And the parents of the other were still alive and there was going to be an inheritance that spouse
But
wasn't.
not been spent yet. Right.
Yeah, right, right, right. And that, I mean, that, we can understand the equities of that. But when you have laws that have supposed bright lines and people just kind of stick their heels in the sand, it's just really too bad. It's really too bad.
Yeah. So what happened with your friends? Did the
Ultimately, after many years of litigating, I think there was some kind of consideration for it, was my understanding without knowing the details.
Yeah. Well, I had a case a number of years ago with a couple that had about $20 million.
Okay.
I mean, that was a few years ago, and 20 million was, a lot of. And
It's 20 million.
yeah, it was 20 million. And they came into mediation, and they were ready to divide everything 50-50. She was staying in the house, and the house itself was worth about 3 million. And I mean, that was going to be part of her half of the settlement, but they weren't going to each have a lot of liquid investments as well. And he came into one mediation session and he said, everybody that I talked to, my friends, my accountant, my business lawyer, are all saying you can't do mediation at your level of assets. You can't sell this in mediation. Why are they saying that to me? He asked. And I said, because by the law, this is your separate property. You have interests in these, you're getting income from those properties. They are not in your joint names with your wife. And by New York law, these are separate property. So you don't have to share any of it with her. And he screwed his face. He said, but she is going to need money to, do this, that, and the other. And I said, well, you would pay her spousal support. And he said, why would I want to do that? Like pay her spousal support forever? Why don't I just split these assets? This is more money than either of us is ever going to spend in our life.
Right.
So that's the settlement that they came to.
And
I just so loved that because they were doing what they both felt was fair and right. I mean, they had had a long marriage. They had both lived on this money. They weren't living a lifestyle, which some people are, where they could go through $20 million, but this couple was not.
Right.
So they felt like it was more money than either of them would ever spend. And that's a nice way to live, not having to worry about money. And there was enough to go around. And they just came up with their own agreement based on their standards of fairness.
Right. And it brings me back to this point that litigators, and let's acknowledge that people become lawyers because they, let's say, like the law, or they like rules, or perhaps, and they learn them, and now they want to enforce them or fight for them. And I'm not sure why they end up in matrimonial, but I think a lot of matrimonial lawyers treat it just as like another part of the law and don't really, as I was saying before, understand emotionally what's going on for people, pay attention to it. They're not helpful about it. And they just feel like it would be malpractice for me to let you give away that money. And you know, if they were working with it, if this was a different kind of person who wasn't that secure in his own feelings and ideas, they can twist them around and just really cause a lot of turmoil.
Yeah.
And so, yet, I know that a lot of lawyers feel like, well, if, you know, then that guy's rights weren't protected or something like this. And I think we very conscientiously reality check
Yeah.
whenever there's an agreement that our clients are making that is different from what would happen in court. We want to make sure they know.
They
Just as
understand.
you know, very clearly spelled it out for him.
Right. I wouldn't want him to be entering this agreement thinking, well, I inherited this during the marriage, so it's owned 50-50.
Right.
I wouldn't want him to be giving her 50% because he thought he had to.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
As long as he has his eyes open and he understands.
Right.
I mean, it was just funny to me that everyone in his life was saying, you can't settle this in mediation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been great to have this chance to talk to you.
Thank you so much. It went so
Kids in
fast.
Mind. I know it goes quickly. I'm just thinking I can answer this question, but I'll let you say, what would you like our audience to take away from our conversation this morning, Teresa?
I think the main thing, and I don't think people realize this going in because of all the pain that they're in, divorce does not have to be a nightmare. It doesn't have to be a nightmare. And as out of control as they feel in the moment, they can control what's going to happen.
Yeah. In mediation and collaborative, they have a
Yes.
chance to control it so much more than in court.
Yes, they can control the outcome. And we're always going to help them stay focused on the kids.
Yeah. One more question. Have
Yes.
you ever seen somebody who went to court and, you know, actually like had a trial or a judge making decisions for them and left the process thing? That was great. I'm so glad I went to
One very short answer to that. In 20 years, I've had 2 trials. And in both of those cases, after the judge made the decision, the parties got together and made a different agreement.
Really?
Yes.
That is fascinating.
Because the court just says sell everything.
Yeah.
They didn't want to sell everything.
They didn't want to sell everything. So they wait years and years and tens of thousands of dollars.
Tens of thousands of dollars.
Hundreds
But
of thousands of dollars.
in both situations, one of them was intractable and wanted what they wanted. And when they didn't get what they wanted, then they realized they had to like settle.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, my dear. I look forward to speaking
Thank
with you again on
Okay,
camera or
Rachel.
off camera. Always
Yes.
a pleasure.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to Keep the Kids in Mind.